Hello and welcome to The Appetite, a podcast brought to you by Opal Food+Body Wisdom, an eating disorder treatment center in Seattle, Washington. The Appetite is a podcast about all things food, body, movement, and mental health. I am Julie Church, co-founder of Opal and nutrition director and director of people and culture. I will be your host today, and I am excited to welcome in a guest, Johanna Kandel, who is the founder and the CEO, director, what else? What are all your names? For the Alliance for Eating Disorders. And so today's show will be kind of an overview of her story, her journey into that, as well as getting to understand some of the things that are going on behind the scenes in some of the different organizations and policy changes that can really impact eating disorder care, treatment, access, and awareness and advocacy. So I'm excited to have you here, Johanna.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Julie.
Yeah. So Johanna's, is there anything you would like for me to add in or for you to add in about your credentials or your title before we move on?
I think more than anything, I'm just a human of lived experience that wanted to give back and make a difference. And I've been in the field. I started the Alliance 25 years ago as a way of paying it forward. And it's what gets me up every morning. And it's literally the most important work I'll do.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So can you share with our listeners a little bit of that journey? Like, when did you find yourself in recovery, really starting to see this as a idea or a dream? Or is it one of those things you woke up 10 years into it and thought, whoa, how'd that happen?
Yeah, I wish. I really, really wish. So, so much of my personal journey became the blueprint of what the Alliance is today. I'm sure that you've had many guests on here that have shared their personal experiences, but I struggled with an eating disorder for over 10 years. I am first generation. My family emigrated here to give me a better life. My father was a Holocaust survivor. My mother came from extreme poverty and was born and raised in Northern Africa. And, I was given every opportunity. They worked really hard. They loved really hard. And, this is one of those things where I couldn't escape the environment I was living in, transgenerational trauma, genetics around eating disorders and other co-occurrent, mental health disorders. So from as long as I could ever remember, I struggled with anxiety. As a little kid, it showed up as, always being anxious, always like hiding behind my mom's like legs, being very shy. And at the age of 3, I started dancing. My mother wanted to put me in ballet because I started to walk with my feet turned in. I was pigeon-toed. They really wanted to give me like an opportunity to move my body, but also to like, have posture and turn my feet out. And, I don't think that they ever expected, but I fell in love with ballet and it became my world. By the time I was 10, I was, you know, uh, dancing 6 days a week. I was spending my summers at School of American Ballet in New York City. And it was my everything, dance, right? Like it's what I wanted to be when I grew up. I remember, having conversations when I was 11 with my mom saying, if I can't dance, I don't necessarily want to do anything. And so because of that, I excelled. I was in a class with, students that were 5, 6 years older than me. And the summer between my sixth and seventh grade year, the artistic director of the professional company came in and said to all of us, we have this big audition coming up. We want you all to dance with the Corps de Ballet in this new production of the Nutcracker. However, we all want you to lose weight before the audition. And that was really the first time that weight was ever brought up. I didn't really know much about weight. Like I was always like on like the smaller side. I was prepubescent. But I also, this was, in the late 80s where, everything was fat free and, everything was like, it was the whole like the epitome of, Calvin Klein and, the whole like adage of, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. And so I remember going home and saying to my mom, I'm going to eat healthy. And being someone who never really liked fruits or vegetables as a parent and, having a child of my own now, her response was spot on. That's excellent. It's good to eat like healthful foods, right? And that's really how
Mm.
my eating disorder began, very truthfully. And I say it, it's this idea of the path to hell is filled with good intentions. Like, I didn't wake up and look out the window in sunny West Palm Beach, Florida, and said, I feel like it's a good day to have an eating disorder today. And yet, what I discovered over the next 10 years is that's very much how it was viewed and how it was treated. So I went on a diet. I went on a simple diet. Like at that time, I did what I thought and what I heard, like what I read on magazines, what I heard on TV, and, this quote unquote innocent diet, because I was genetically predisposed, because eating disorders ran in my family, because I had the co-occurrent,
Mhm.
other, mental health disorders like anxiety and depression, because I had a lot of those inherent temperament traits, like the perfectionism, the people pleasing, the black and white, the perfect storm all came together,
Yeah.
and before I knew it, I was struggling. And
Mhm.
my eating disorder really sort of went under the radar for a very, very long time. And it really wasn't until I was about 17 years old where my mother happened to walk in on me in the bathroom
Okay.
and saw what I looked like without the baggy clothes, and saw and I remember in that moment being so scared that what was going on with me, because I really at that point didn't even know it was an eating disorder, very truthfully, that it was going to be taken away. And then there was a small part of me that was like, oh, thank God someone is seeing this.
Yeah.
Went to the doctor the next day. He put me on the scale and looked at my mom and said, just go home and feed her some good French food and she'll be fine. A few days later, I ended up in the ED and was put into the coronary care unit. And the entire time I was in the hospital, no one ever said the word eating disorder. And what was really interesting is at the time I fit that, archaic, like stereotype of what eating disorders look like. I looked very similar to, at that time it was like those Lifetime movies. Like I
Yes.
looked like those girls in the Lifetime movies, but yet nothing was said. And so I was sent on my merry way and just, continued. And my eating disorder ultimately, I graduated from high school. I was dancing professionally, but my eating disorder ultimately had me have to give up my dance career, because I was at that point, I'd gotten too sick. And so when I stopped dancing, I really had this moment of, I don't know what else to do. Like, I don't know anything more than I know about ballet. The only thing that came to mind was whatever I was going through, this eating thing in my head. I started reading up about eating disorders. And, at that time, we weren't as informed on how to share like memoirs and information. And so the more memoirs I read, the better I got at my eating disorder, and the more, triggered I was, and, you know, struggled with various types of eating disorders. And then I had this moment of, if I ever get better, I want to do something. And I honestly didn't know how to get better. So I went to the dean of the local college, because I had never planned on going to college. I was going to dance professionally. And I said, look, I am in recovery from an eating disorder, which was a total lie at the time. And I want to give back. I want to help others. And so I ended up getting accepted into the university. And then I started going to school, and I used it in a maladaptive way, same as I used it with my exercise and my food. And I took 8 to 9 classes a semester because it was a way of me also numbing and also escaping. And so I was getting ready to graduate from my undergrad program. I was all set to go to a graduate program. I had this moment where I knew that my eating disorder was ultimately going to kill me if I didn't do anything. And I had this moment of, the fear of change was a little bit less than my willingness to just sort of open the door and peek out the door just to see what the other side was like.
Mm.
And so I called my parents up and I said, Mom, Dad, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I really thought in that moment, Julie, that that's all it would take.
Mm.
And unfortunately, at that time, I didn't look like I had an eating disorder anymore. My insurance plan didn't pay for treatment at all. My family didn't have money to pay for
Yeah.
treatment. And so I looked for help wherever I could. I ended up going to AA meetings, even though alcohol was never my drug of choice, because I was craving community. I was craving connection. I was hoping that I would be in a space where someone would just say something, and in that moment, I wouldn't feel so alone. And so I started going to these meetings, and then I found a substance use clinician that was willing to see me at a reduced rate. And I went to see her. She was so lovely. And she said to me in that moment, I'm really happy that you're here, but I need to tell you that you're always going to be struggling with your eating disorder.
Mhm.
And I think she viewed it in that addiction model of like once an addict, always an addict. And, I honestly like I'm very like I would never put my interpretation of what recovery means onto anybody else because it's very individualized. We don't have like a standard definition of it anyways. But in that moment, what I really needed to happen was for her to say, gets better. So unfortunately, I left her office and I continued in my, engaging in my eating disorder. And a few months later, I found another therapist who was willing to see me at sliding scale. And that's where my healing began. And
Mhm.
it was one step forward, two steps back. And as
Yeah.
someone who was really entrenched in the all or nothing, the black or white, that either I'm struggling or I'm recovered, I'm yes or I'm no, it was really, really hard. And what I had to learn is that it wasn't about the trips and falls, it was about what happens after. And so that's where my healing
Mhm.
journey began.
Yeah.
That's also when I decided that, maybe I need to take a break from grad school and not do that. And that's when I called my parents up and I said, "So I think what I really want to do is start a nonprofit." And that's how the alliance
Okay.
began.
Okay. Wow. Well, we'll get into that a little bit, but let me just reflect on your recovery story and your journey through your eating disorder. What I'm struck by is that beginning point of you reaching, or kind of reaching for what was recommended by a trusted person, right? Okay, everybody go lose weight. It sounds neutral, right?
Yeah.
You didn't know any better, and you were just going to sort of quote unquote be healthier. And I think that that is a beginning of so many people's journey with an eating disorder, unfortunately, and our
Yeah.
culture and the way that health is talked about, and then what is touted as healthy versus unhealthy, really does lead so many people astray. But then in your pursuit of healing, the help, like you did continue to ask for help. And that is lovely. I think that is a big step when one has to come to the noting that you needed help, but you went to your parents, or you went to a dean, or you went to
Mhm.
the AA meetings. Like just reaching out is also notable to me, because I do think some people's journeys are more people come towards them and say, I am
Yeah.
worried about you and I want you, or I'm going to make you, or here's the ultimatum,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, that's interesting to hear how much this was born out of your own desire to get the help and finding creative ways to find anybody that might care, anyone that would see you. It's really powerful.
And thank you for that. And I also just want to sort of caveat that by saying is that I wasn't always motivated to get better.
Of
I
course.
wasn't 100% motivated to get better. It was so scary. It was so overwhelming. I doubted it every single second. I hated every minute of my recovery journey. I have to state that. And it was the hardest thing that I ever did. And still to this day. And I am so grateful for my journey. And I'm so grateful for my recovery. It's not My recovery is not at all what I thought it would be. It's not sunshine, bunnies, and rainbows. I say this all the time. Like, you don't recover to utopia, you recover to life. And there's so much amazingness in that gray, in that, that rainbow between the black and the white. And it's my healing has given me so many gifts that I didn't even expect.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so hard in the middle of the struggle. And I, I'm feeling some of that today, because obviously when we're meeting today, there's treatment happening back at Opal, and there's just two really heavy clinical things going on for two different clients that I'm just like, oh, what's going on over there? So I'm trying to be present, but I'm also just wondering, because they're both two different people at very, very important crossroads for like what they may choose, I guess, in terms of life, and choose in terms of recovery, and just thinking about them as as you share your journey. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, everybody's journey is so different, but Yeah. So, I just wonder with these people that are on my heart right now too. It's like they will have, this is what I believe so strongly, is like they will have another journey, like another thing that they will, and they have something to contribute to this world that's what's always kind of gotten me motivated to do this work, is just seeing that in people. So I love that.
I love that. And I think, so often that I think it's having the ability or having the gift of letting other people hold the hope for you when you're not able to hold on to hope yourself. And I think that that's one of the things that I love so much about the groups that we hold here at the Alliance is that, we say this to individuals that are on the journey to recovery, as well as loved ones, as well as is we get to hold on to hope for each other, because it's really hard. This is really hard. And I think, it's so funny when I first started the organization, I did a lot of speaking primarily in treatment centers and speaking to milieus. And I would come in and say, recovery, like, treatment sucks. Like, it's hard. And like, you would just see like these program directors look at me like, oh no, who did we bring in? And, because I just wanted to validate because when, I think there's also this ideal that like, once you start your recovery journey, it's going to be this fairy tale ending of like perfect ever after. And you're recovering to life. And like, life is a lot. Like, not only are you experiencing stuff personally, we're experiencing stuff as a country, as a world,
Hmm.
and all of that stuff. We're also, as you talked about, like we also are recovering in a world that has a lot of weight stigma, a lot of fat phobia, that is very diet
Yes.
centered, and like here you are trying to take care of yourself to, have like, body neutrality and like having gratitude for your body and for all the amazing things. And then you're constantly being told that it's not good enough and that you have to change and that, all the things that you're hearing from, if you have the privilege of having providers that are telling you like, in this silo of like, you have to like not think about it, you don't have to hear about it. And then you go into the world and everyone's telling you that you're not enough of this or you're too much of that or this is wrong about you. So, just holding on to the layeredness of the conversation and also for those two humans that you talked about and for all the people that are listening and people that are on the journey to recovery is that it is really hard and I do believe that recovery is possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we could have a whole different podcast around just what is recovery and definitions and how different people take it. So I appreciated you sharing that about your journey too. As I hear your recovery story, I can kind of see some of the ways that it shows itself, I guess, in the way that the National Alliance of Eating Disorders is structured and some of the
Mhm.
aspects of it. So, if anybody checks out the website and sees all that it has, it certainly is emphasizes increasing access to care, support, and education. And so, I wonder if you could dive into just sharing a little bit about those three aspects of what the
Yeah.
Alliance has to offer, and make sure that our listeners know about that, as well as just, just getting us in the scoop.
Absolutely. So, as you shared, my experience was really the blueprint of when I imagined creating the alliance. And it's gone through many different versions of it. When I first started, I was 21 years old. I took out a student loan and I moved back in with my parents. And I was lucky enough to have an uncle that had a spare office that was the size of a closet that he allowed me to, set up shop in. And, for the first 10 years, it was me and, a handful of volunteers. And I worked 3 jobs to keep the Alliance open. And I paid the Alliance to work there in a sense.
Hmm.
But it really has grown into this beautiful leader where right now our main program pillars are we have the national helpline. So we have a helpline that's open Monday through Friday. And something that's really beautiful about our helpline is everyone who picks up the phone is licensed and specialized in the treatment of eating disorders. So unlike many other helplines you can call for all different types of things, like the people that pick up the phone can offer really beautiful psycho ed. They can hold space. And we also can do referrals to all levels of care, from outpatient providers like therapists, dietitians, even coaches, all the way up to acute medical stabilization. So last year, we answered around 7,300 calls from
Wow.
all 50 states in the country. We also have the largest and inclusive referral database for the treatment of eating disorders, which is findedhelp.com. Something that's really beautiful about that is that it's one of the few non-pay to play referral databases, meaning that providers do not have to pay to have a listing. We really wanted to make this as inclusive and unbiased as possible. So you can go in and you can put your insurance, you can put, what type of care you're looking for, whether it's an outpatient provider or higher levels of care. And it will actually give you programs that accept your insurance, that can maybe hold your co-occurrent diagnoses, that whether it's virtual versus in person or both. And last year we had over 340,000 referrals on that platform. And then
Wow.
like the last really big piece of program when it comes to access is groups, right? Like for me, groups were such a big part of my healing journey. So, we had 23 in-person support groups up until March 13th, 2020. I remember the date. And then
Okay.
we started getting calls from around the country, the churches, synagogues, community centers that we hold our groups. We're going to close for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
right? With everything that was going on. So we were really faced, with this dilemma and opportunity, right? And so we knew that given the constraints of the pandemic, the collective anxiety, the social isolation, like all the things that really can be, activating for people with eating disorders, we worked all weekend to try to figure out how do we bring our support groups to a virtual platform? And literally from that Friday to the 16th, so we're coming up soon,
Yeah.
which is that Monday, we actually moved our groups to a virtual platform. And we started with one virtual pro recovery group, one virtual friends and family. And now we have 19 free weekly therapist led support groups.
Amazing.
And last year we had over 33,000 participants from all 50 states and 88 countries around the world, which is really beautiful. As long as you're English speaking, you can attend our groups. And it's really important for me, like all of our programs are clinician led. Something that's really cool about our support groups is about 80% of our 80 some therapists that work for us for groups are humans of lived experience themselves.
Mm.
So if they choose to come into the space with their lived experience, they're able to maintain, those clinical guardrails of holding a group, but also that peer to peer of like, I know what you're going through. I can understand. Even though our stories are not identical, I can absolutely relate.
Hmm.
Um, so those are, our
So
big
great.
pillars. The other parts you mentioned is education. We do a bunch of free continuing education webinars throughout the year because we really want people to have access to really good training in the field of eating disorders, even though we're not a certifying body. We just want to offer really great training opportunities for humans that are interested in learning more about eating disorders. And then the last piece is, and I know we're going to get to advocacy,
Sure.
but we work with pretty much all the social media platforms and the three major AI platforms on being that connector to care and service. So, for example, when people search certain keywords on social platforms, oftentimes there's a block and there's our phone number encouraging people to call us. And I also am able to sit at a lot of tables where I can really use the privilege that I have in those rooms to try to make it a little bit safer for humans that experience eating disorders as well as their loved ones.
Okay. I want to hear more about that. So many things. Yes. And I think being somebody that I've been in the field of eating disorders for over 20 years, it certainly, I didn't necessarily know about the Alliance at the very beginning, but then kind of began to see it and really appreciate the organization and all that it offers. The support group piece is really dear to my heart too, because that's what I started to do at my very, very early part of my career was doing something in our community in person. And It was happened to be at a church, and there was a family and friends one that was led by parents of a child who had survived an eating disorder. And so we kind of co-did this family and friends, and then the client, the individuals that were struggling. And it definitely formed my early work as a dietitian and just a supporter in the community. So I can hear, that just the importance of groups and support like that is so key. And the fact that I giggled as you talked about the pivoting during pandemic, because that's what we all had to do too,
Yep.
and that you just are like, yep, over a weekend, we just changed the whole structure of everything and communicated it all and got all the information out, and poof, here we are. So it certainly did. Right? That just catapulted the growth for your
Mhm.
ability to reach so many more people so much quicker. So I'm so thankful for that. And I know that we continue to give you as a strong resource for our clients, and use that database that you have, because do
Mhm.
really trust that it's an easy one to navigate and it's thorough. So thank you for all of that. And I guess the advocacy piece, I always find that, as you alluded to that, it is something that I always am so curious about, like what is going on behind the scenes and what is
Mhm.
happening that perhaps is going to change some of the trajectory of access to care or education or support. So I am curious if you could just give us a little bit of the landscape of kind of how it is that, because I think in your bio, I think it even, the way that it's said it is that you are involved and are a national voice in national mental health policy and
Mhm.
legislative advocacy. So
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you can even almost define kind of what that looks like and what that actually is in tangible ways, and then explain what might be happening there, or give us some hope about maybe some of the things you're working on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I never thought that I would have any interest in anything political, anything policy. I mean, in full transparency, I think I slept through American government class. But it was around 24 years ago, and my dear friend, Millie Plotkin, who actually now works for the Alliance, which is so full circle. She's really our eating disorder librarian. She's a spectacular human, and I feel so lucky to have her in my life and call her my friend. She was doing a candlelight vigil on like literally on the lawn of Capitol Hill, and I was like, I'm gonna go. And I had a family friend of mine that said, well, if you're gonna go to DC, why don't you talk to your member of Congress? And I'm like, great, great. How do I do that? So at the time I went to Borders, the bookstore, and I got one of those yellow for dummy books. And it was like, it was, I think, something like, lawmaking for dummies, or government for dummies. And I watched that Schoolhouse Rock video, The Bill is a Bill, just to try to get some
Totally.
awareness. And I made an appointment with my congressman's office, and by some miracle, I got a meeting with my congressman. And I walked into the meeting, and I am never at a loss for words. Like, I can talk to a rock all day long. And I sat down, and he just looked at me, and he's like, "Why are you here?" And I couldn't say a word. I was like, I don't know why I'm here, in my head. And he was like, "Okay, well, we gotta, and and then he looked at me and said, "Tell me a little bit about yourself." And I started to tell him about my experience with my eating disorder. And that was the moment that I think I became like an advocate, because I was like, "Oh, we have stories to tell, and whether or not they're heard in the moment, they're absolutely worth being told." And so about 6 months later, I heard about this formation of this advocacy organization called the Eating Disorders Coalition for Research, Policy and Action. And so I went to the first advocacy day with them, and I just started to get involved with the EDC. And so several years later, they formed a junior board, and they asked me to be the chair of the junior board. And then after that, I sort of continued to go to Capitol Hill twice a year and go to Advocacy Day, and then was asked to join their board. Where I mean, I've been very proud to be a member of their board of directors for many, many years. And over that time, we started. Remember, our first piece of legislation was called the FREED Act, which was the federal response to eliminating eating disorders. And it was a dream bill. It
Okay.
was creating centers of excellence, mandating insurance to pay for treatment, amazing education, which was literally a dream bill.
Yeah.
But over the years, we were like, we started to think about, which ultimately then became one piece of it, which created the Center of Excellence for Eating Disorders, was then known as the Anna Weston Act, which was named after my dear friend, Kitty Weston, who is literally my hero when it comes to advocacy. Her daughter died due to her eating disorder and has been such an incredible trailblazer throughout the years, and was so gracious enough to let us name this bill after her daughter. And in 2016, at that time, I was the president of the Eating Disorders Coalition. I had my daughter, and 3 weeks later, I get a call saying, "You have to go to DC. This bill is moving." And I went, I got on a plane.
Oh, wow.
I got on a plane.
Yeah.
And it was this piece of legislation was actually brought into the 21st Century Cures Act, which was the first time in the history of our country that there was legislation around eating disorders. And that piece of legislation was the last piece of legislation that President Obama signed before he left office.
Hmm.
And so that was a very big victory. And since then, we've also passed the SERV Act, which is a piece of legislation that takes a look at TRICARE specifically, because the way that TRICARE was written was that in order to get residential care for the treatment of eating disorders, you need to have anorexia nervosa and you have to be under the age of 21. I mean,
So
so
limiting.
ridiculous. So this piece of legislation actually clarifies it. It was passed, and now we just need to get it, like, we need to get it moving, because all humans deserve access to care, not just specific humans.
Yes.
And then the piece of legislation that I'm particularly passionate about, and I'm sure you are too, being a dietitian, is the Nutrition Care Act, which specifically looks at Medicare, so Medicare Part B for individuals that are over a certain age and also have, Social Security disability. And it literally makes medical nutrition therapy mandatorily covered, just how diabetes and end-stage renal failure is. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this piece of legislation is because, as we all know, and it's also like the day that we're recording the podcast, it's National Dietitians
Oh,
Day,
yeah,
which
that's right.
I'm so grateful. Thank you for all of dietitians for doing what you do. You all are so important and so incredible. But, if you're not able to have a dietitian on your team, it's like driving a car with three wheels. Like, how are you going to do that? Like, we need dietitians as part of it has to happen. And it shouldn't be a luxury. Like, any type of eating disorder treatment should not be a luxury. So this piece of legislation mandates medical nutrition therapies covered. But the beauty about the reason why we went with Medicare Part B is because once Medicare does it, then other insurance follows suit. So like TRICARE will follow suit, Medicaid can follow suit, and then ERISA policies, like general insurance policies, will follow suit. So, I definitely think that there's a lot of feelings right now with the political climate, and one thing that we hear a lot is this overwhelming amount of helplessness. And for me, what I do what I can, and showing up and reaching out to my member of Congress, reaching out to my senators to say, will you support this life-saving piece of legislation? It feels like I can show up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I feel like the coalition, the Eating Disorder Coalition that you mentioned, does do a good job of communicating about those opportunities, giving us really easy ways to connect with those that are in our area and region, and just making sure that these topics are on their radar and that they're voting the way that they, at least be informed so that they can vote,
Exactly.
hopefully in support of things. And I will put, if there's anything current when I'm releasing this that you listeners can be kind of sending letters out about or anything like that, I will certainly have that in the show notes. I know that I just sent to our staff the one related to the Medicare coverage for medical nutrition therapy. So just trying to get anyone, right, to just submit letters and send emails and things like that do help. I think it's interesting because that advocacy piece, or like trying to find, I think about politics or I think about advocacy, I think it's, you have to know the right people, or you need to be invited into the conversations. I don't know. I'm watching The Diplomat right now, that show.
Such a good show.
And, how do you get into the rooms? How do you have the
Yeah.
conversations? How do you have the relationships? But, you obviously have earned that. You have been around and you were consistent in your early career, it sounds like, right, is going there and meeting some of the people. But, for somebody that is listening that just wants to do something or has some desire to get involved, I wonder what you would say to them.
Yeah.
And maybe even well, I'll start there. Yeah. What would you say to them?
So one of the things that I like to remind myself a lot when I have tremendous imposter syndrome and I like walk into an office and I'm like sort of looking around, I'm like, I feel like those highlights, like what doesn't belong
Oh,
pictures, like, is that, when it's like your member of Congress, like you're entitled to meet with them. Like they actually technically work for you, you know? So
okay.
one of the things that I love about being a member of the Eating Disorders Coalition is that they will help you. Like they send out amazing action alerts where it's literally all you have to do is like put your name on it and it automatically sends it to your member's office. Or like they'll say, here's the phone number to your member's office. Here's a script. Like, and actually, so I mean, it gives you all of those pieces to make it not so daunting. And I will tell you that over the last like 25 years, because the Alliance just celebrated its 25th anniversary, is there's a lot of offices and a lot of tables and a lot of places that I wasn't invited to. And that doesn't mean that we don't belong. And
Sure.
that's really what it comes down to is, you know, my member of Congress became the champion of the Anna Weston Act in addition to, several other senators. And it literally he called me a squeaky wheel because I just kept on showing up and kept on saying, like, you need to care about eating disorders. Never had a loved one struggle with an eating disorder. It wasn't a cause, but we kept on showing up. We kept on using our voice. And I was so lucky to have representatives from my area continue to share their stories. One thing that the coalition tells you all the time is that, yeah, there's lobbyists that come, right? Like, but when you show up and you put a face, a voice, a story behind a statistic or a bill, things start to change. And I will tell you, when I first started the Alliance, but also when I first started advocacy, no one talked about eating disorders. You would go into an office and no one wanted to talk about eating disorders. And I think there's still a lot of shame and stigma, and we can absolutely hold that. But now you go into an office or you meet with a member of Congress or their staff virtually, inevitably someone will say, oh, I know someone who struggled. I struggled. My roommate, my brother, my partner, like, and you can see that there's just so much more awareness. Like, and at the end of the day, I always sort of keep this in the back of my mind is like, we haven't come this far to only come this far. We have to acknowledge how far we've come and continue putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure. I think of even your story of when you sought treatment and didn't have access and were creative in the ways that you were doing that. And I love that seems as if you're advocating for the whole spectrum of care, right? And have to start where we can, but recognizing that, yeah, there are people that need all the way to acute care and all the people that also need the free support group. So
Yeah.
it's the whole mix of things. So and this is maybe, I don't know if you have an answer to this question, but I'm wondering if there is a person right now that you wish that you could get a conversation with, or somebody that you believe could be strongly influential in changing some things in the field of eating disorders or the advocacy work. Is there somebody that you're trying to get that conversation with or trying to be the squeaky wheel with?
I mean, if I'm going to fully be honest,
Okay,
I would
yeah.
have to say Taylor Swift. Like, I would
Ah,
have to say
yes.
that.
Okay, that
Um,
makes sense.
you know, uh, also it would make me the best mom ever. Like I
Fair.
just, hold that. But,
Okay.
you know, uh,
No,
that's such
that's
an
good.
amazing question. I think there's what I really, really want more than anything is I I, I want to be able to help. Like I don't want to be like, listen, it takes all of us to do this work. It takes all of us together to do this work. Is if I could have one wish, it would be to change the narrative of who develops eating, like completely change the narrative of who develops eating disorders and what they look like. Because I think even though we've definitely broadened the conversation around eating disorders, I think that expected, learned, ideal of who develops eating disorders causes so many people to suffer in silence and to not get the intervention, to not get the access, to not get the treatment, so
Yep.
I would love to help broaden that conversation. And that's not me broadening it. It's me being able to bring different voices to the table. Like I want to be very aware that like whatever I can do to continue to make this about all of us that are struggling. Like again, even like when it comes to politics, like yes, there's a lot going on. Is doesn't matter what side of the aisle you land on, is that eating disorders are non-discriminatory. They don't discriminate between politics, age, gender, race, class, sexual orientation, ability, neurodiversity, body shape and size. Like, and I just wish that there was a way that we could communicate that more, because I do think
Hmm.
that when you're able to be seen and be supported, that's when light comes in and that's when healing happens.
Hmm. I know. Yeah. I feel that so much too. I think that at the early intervention kind of pediatrician landscape, that is, I think, such a huge place of change that needs, because
Yep.
I do believe there's so many kids that get missed, and unfortunately many, many kids and families that get directed the wrong direction around
Yes.
weight and size and health.
Yes.
And then that
Yes.
then leads to an eating disorder. So, and when I think about just different, diverse backgrounds and race and ethnicity and culture, it gets really complicated in terms of how food and body and weight and all of that is talked about, and when it's secretive and needing to be a family secret versus public, and how to navigate that. But I just think the pediatrician or the medical landscape, there's something there that I just think somehow crosses all of that, and I do believe we could reach and prevent some eating disorders if it was done there. But okay, so the other angle, you are such a person of wisdom and care, and you've had so many conversations with different people. This is going to be like a bit of a shift, listeners, in the way that I'm asking this question, but I know as a dietitian, I get into so many conversations of, oh, you're a dietitian, or, oh, I work with eating disorders. And then people will say
Uh-huh.
something like, oh, I wish I had an eating disorder.
Yes, they do.
Or, oh, I think I have an eating disorder. I just can't stop eating. Or they'll
Right.
say just really shallow, I would say,
We're
things.
going to say ignorant
Okay,
sometimes.
okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm just so curious because you are very strongly, very known in as somebody, if you're going to have to say the word eating disorder likely when you're introducing yourself, or when somebody says, at your kid's school play or something, what do you
Mhm.
do? I'm wondering how you handle some of that people being uninformed. Do you have any great nuggets of how to respond and how to allow for it to not be too socially awkward?
So if it's someone that I do not know, if it's like someone on a
Yes,
plane, I sometimes tell them that I'm an accountant or I'm a garbage collector.
you
Because
really do.
I really do,
Okay.
because I'm
Okay.
like,
I can't
you
do it.
know, I mean, I can tolerate until I can't anymore.
Yes.
And the ignorance, I can give grace, because like, if you don't know, you don't know. But also, this is also my community that I adore, right?
Yeah.
Like, and when it's, parent of my kiddos, best friend or friend from class, what I try to do is I tried to remember grace always. I try to remember, like, I give myself a beat to breathe. I also sometimes, very honestly, Julie, I don't necessarily say eating disorders. I say mental health. Like, I keep it pretty broad,
Okay.
because sometimes I'm okay with having the conversation of, oh, well, did you know that there's serious mental illness and that they're not disorders of choice, and that they have the highest lethality rate, with every 52 minutes someone dying as a direct result? Sometimes I can be that person.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm human and I don't want to be that person. So
Yeah.
I really honestly, when I first started, I showed up at every conversation, every single conversation. And now I allow myself to
Mm.
also take care of myself in those conversations, because now specifically, and I don't think that this is anything new, but I think we're just hearing more of it with like GLP-1s and the comeback of like skinny talk and thinspo and all of that. It's exhausting. It's really, really exhausting. So, I'm always here to support people that need support. I will always be that person. And I also give myself permission to be human. So whether it is being an accountant or, working in mental health, I show up.
I love that. I love that. And maybe too, that is part of your own healthy boundaries to continue to solidify your recovery, right? And
Yeah.
I do hope that listeners are feeling, inspired by Johanna as a real person, a person with a real story that also commits to just putting herself into these moments in a real way, but also boundaries at times too, and maybe choosing to not, which I think
Yeah.
is lovely. Is there anything last on your mind that you would want to share in closing, or anything that we missed?
The only thing that I want to say is, if you're listening and you are on the journey of recovery, know that it gets better. Know that it can absolutely get better. If you've been struggling with an eating disorder for a beat or a lifetime, I do believe in hope. I do believe in the power of community and connection and healing in community, and that you don't have to struggle alone. You don't have to struggle in silence. Reach out to Opal, reach out to the Alliance. We have groups 7 days a week. As long as you have any type of Wi-Fi connection, you're able to connect. If you are looking for resources, absolutely call the helplines. Like, we are here to help you. And I also want to just say, if you are supporting a loved one who's struggling with an eating disorder, thank you. Thank you for loving your human so much. Please remember that, you have to take care of yourself through this as well, and that you too are not alone. That there's places and people that can help support you, can support your loved one. And yeah, that whatever the Alliance can do, or only a phone call, an email, a smoke signal away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us and for sharing with the appetite all your wisdom and passion. It's really inspiring. Listeners, if you want to learn more about Johanna or the National Alliance for Eating Disorders, please check out the show description for links. I will put any good nuggets there and just easy links to to her organization. Thank you also to Jack Straw Cultural Center for sound engineering. Thanks to Aaron Davidson for the Appetite's original music, and to David Bazzi for editing. If you want to learn more about Opal's programming, please find us at opalfoodandbody.com or follow us on Instagram. Until next time.